Okay, so what Michal does is she lets David down through a window. Now the reason I said that it was probably at least a two-story house, I think the wording would have been let him out through a window if it were a single story, but if she lets him down through a window, that seems to indicate it was more like at least a two-story, maybe even a three-story house. And so David slips out. Now, wasn't difficult for David because by this time David was an accomplished soldier and stealth would have been something that would have been very common to him. And so for him to sneak past the men from Saul that were out gathering, not a big deal. It is also possible that he may have come upon someone who was around the perimeter of his house, and David may have been accosted by one of them, and it may have been somebody that David was really tight with and really respected David, and they just kind of turned the other way. But at any rate, David gets beyond them, and he goes on the run. So the next morning, Saul sends men to get David, and they want to capture David. And so Michal, his wife, has taken this thing called an idol or a teraphim. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I read a couple of different things about this idol. One of the commentators said that this was not an idol with which to worship another god. This was something the Israelites used to help them in their worship of God. I thought, okay, that's kind of unusual. Not sure I agree with that. And then another one said that because the men of that day and time were quite often away for long periods of time, that it was common for the women to make a sort of a statue that resembled their husband, so that they would look at it and remember him while they're gone. Now remember, any of you that have known military wives, those military wives hang on to photographs or videos, right? They didn't have videos or photographs back then, so that one seems the most logical to me, that she may have, in fact, formed this physical representation of David. But whatever, it was something that was like full body size, and she puts it in the bed, and this will give you a little indication about David's hair. Anybody know what goat's hair looks like? It's not real fine, is it? Well, she lays this idol in the bed. She takes goat's hair and she puts it as though it's the back of David's head. It's like he's kind of turned away, and then she covers him up. And so the men from Saul come in, and they're like, "Excuse me, ma'am, but we have come to take David to your father." "I'm sorry, he's sick." Now, can we excuse Michal for lying? No. Lying's wrong, period. But Michal did what she thought she was supposed to do to try and preserve David. And so the men go back to Saul, and they said, "Well, King Saul, we couldn't bring him because he's dead. I mean, he's sick. Not dead, he's sick." And Saul says, "No. Now think about this for a minute. This is the man who, when he turned to go from Samuel, God changed his heart. This is the man who God gave him a great victory over Nahash the Ammonite. This is the man who was called to be the first king of Israel. And what does he say? Go and bring him in his bed so that I can kill him." Wow. He has really gotten paranoid. It wasn't enough that it's not go and kill him in his bed. No, bring him here so I can kill him in his bed. And so they go and they're knocking on the door again. And this is the king's daughter, and I'm sure she had standing in the court and people respected her. And so again, they're at the door. "Sorry, ma'am, but the king has insisted that we bring David in his bed. Excuse us." So they push past her. They go in. And I don't know how they discovered it, but it says, as they entered, or when they entered, there was the idol in the bed. And at the head was some goat's hair. So, Saul demands an audience with his daughter. It doesn't tell us that, but it has to happen because it says in the next verse, 17, Saul said to Michal, "Why did you deceive me like this and send my enemy away so that he escaped?" Now, she's already lied once, and we don't excuse that. She's going to lie again. Michal says, "He said to me, 'Let me get away. Why should I kill you?'" It's never wrong. It's never right to do wrong to achieve something right. Does that make sense? It's never right to do something wrong to achieve what is right. She didn't have to lie, but she did. She was afraid of her father's wrath. And we don't know what kind of relationship he had with Michal. We do know that he was a little controlling, because later, after David has gone on the run, he gives her as wife to another guy, a guy named Paltiel, who wouldn't be a threat to the throne, because David has become this vagabond leader now. And as long as Michal is still the wife of David, it gives him legitimate claim to the throne. And so he gives her away to somebody else. And by the way, I will say that this other guy that he gives her to treated her well. We can't lay any blame at his doorstep. The blame goes to this controlling man called Saul. And so David makes his escape, and where do you think he went? Well, you know, if you had been anointed king by this venerable, aged prophet, and now you are on the run for your life, and you know that this prophet is connected to the power of God, and you believe in the power of God, where are you going to go? To the prophet. You're going to go to Samuel. And so that's exactly what David does. David flees, and he makes his escape, and he goes to Samuel at Ramah. And he tells him everything that Saul had done to him. Now, I personally think I don't have any evidence scripturally except the love for God that David has and the attitudes that David betrays. But I really feel like David has been influenced by Samuel a lot. And so this is him running to a man that he really appreciates and values. And so he goes and he begins to talk to him. And you know, this is Samuel. He's probably up in his 80s at this time. And you've got this young guy, David, and he's probably, by this point in time, is probably in his early 20s at least. And so he's pouring out his heart to Samuel. And he and Samuel go to a place called Naioth. Now, that's an interesting place, because according to one commentator, there is no location known as Naioth. It was a word that indicated a school of learning. So what he did was he took David to a place where there were a lot of people that were really in touch with God. It would be kind of like the equivalent of him going to a Bible college campus today. They didn't have this back then. But you'll remember, where was it? Back in chapter 4, 6, somewhere around there. I talked to you about that time period, that 20-year time period between the defeat at Aphek and the victory at Michmash. And I told you that during that time, there were 3 things that Samuel did which resulted in a revival. He went from place to place, judging and teaching. He trained men, and he established this school of prophets. And this school of prophets that started with Samuel this is where he is now. This place called Naioth was the school of the prophets, and he went there. But this is going to continue. It doesn't just end with the death of Samuel, because we find it once again later on during the life of Elijah, and then again the life of Elisha. And they both talk about the school of the prophets. It was begun right here during Samuel's ministry. And so Samuel is ministering to David, encouraging him in the Lord. I'm certain that that's going on. And then word gets to Saul. David is in Naioth. He's at the school for the prophets. So what does Saul do? He sends men to capture David. There's a story later on in the book of 1st or 2nd Kings about, I think it was Elijah. It might have been Elisha, one of those two prophets. And he's on top of this hill. And the king sends word to him, and he sends a troop of like 50 men. And they come up and they said, "Man of God, the king says, come down." And the man of God says, "If I'm a man of God, may fire come down from heaven and burn you up." Whoosh! All 50 of them burn up. Somebody runs back to the king and tells him. He sends another troop. Same thing happens. Third troop comes, and finally one of the guys wises up and respects the man of God and treats him like he needs to be treated. And the prophet comes down and goes with him. 3 times, it's going to happen right here. So he sends this group of men, and it says that this group of guys that are coming to capture David, we don't know how many there were, but they see a group of prophets prophesying with Samuel standing there. So picture. How many of you have ever been to an old-fashioned camp meeting? Any of you? Old-fashioned camp meeting? I grew up in this camp meeting that was a sawdust floor camp meeting, you know, and I can still remember the services where we'd have a packed tabernacle and somebody be leading the worship, and you could just sense the presence of God in that place. So picture something like that. Samuel's leading, and they're prophesying, and I'm not even really sure what that meant in that day and time, but it had something to do with an experience that was kind of overpowering them, and it was a very obvious experience. They were definitely worshiping. And so anyway, they're all worshiping and they're prophesying. Samuel's leading them. And so here comes the bad guys in the back door to arrest David. Now David's probably up there with Samuel too. And they come in. I wonder, did David's heart skip a beat when he saw him? I don't think so. He's standing next to Samuel. And the presence of God is very real. And don't you know, these guys come in, however many there are, and all of a sudden, the Spirit of God falls on them, and they begin to prophesy. And it was like, I never ceased to be amazed at the power of God that was manifested in the ministry and the life of Samuel. Back at the Battle of Michmash, many of you will remember how I contrasted for you the difference between those 2 Nazarites, Samson and Samuel, both of whom were Nazarites, both of whom had taken, their parents had taken the vow when they were still in the womb that their hair would never be cut. That was the Nazarite vow. Samson, God came on him, but with Samuel, God got involved. And God continued to be involved in the life of Samuel. And so this was the safest place that David could be. And so now the Spirit of God again is getting involved, and these guys are falling and they're just worshiping and prophesying or whatever. And so word gets back to Saul. Now I don't know who got loose to go back and send word, but somebody got loose to go back to Saul and run all the way back to where Saul had his palace. He said, "Saul, you're not going to believe this, but those tough guys you sent to capture David, they came under the power of God. They're prophesying. All right, we'll send another group. You guys, over there, you go." So he sends stronger, meaner guys, and they come. Same thing happens. They come in the back door, and they're overpowered, and they begin to prophesy. And so Saul gets word again, "Hey, oh, mighty king, you're not going to like this." But the same thing happened to them. And so he sends a third group. And I can't help but imagine that he's sending stronger guys and meaner guys. But every time, God just knocks them down. They're prophesying. They're under the power of God, under the control of God. And so this may be the first place that the old saying came from. If you want something done right, do it yourself. So Saul says, "I'm going to go. I've sent 3 groups of guys. They have all fallen under the power of God, and they have not done what I asked them to do, so I'm going to go." So Saul comes. Look what happens. It says that he himself, verse 22, left for Ramah and went to the great cistern at Seku, and he asked, "Where are Samuel and David?" "Oh, over in Naoth. They're at the school in Ramah." they said. So Saul went to Naioth at Ramah. But the Spirit of God came even on him. And it says that he stripped off his garment. Now that does not mean that he became a spiritual streaker. Okay? It simply means that he took off his kingly garments. And the words that are used there indicate that he took off the garments of rank that indicated he was still clothed, but it was his kingly garments he took off. And he began to prophesy in Samuel's presence. And even that word naked there indicates a taking off of those things which indicated his rank. And it says that he prophesied, he lay there all that day and all that night. And that's why the people said, is Saul also among the prophets? When you are in the center of God's will, and when you are doing what God wants you to do, you're invincible. And we see this right here with David. This king, one of the most powerful kings in that region, was after David, but it didn't make a difference because God was on his side. And I can't help but think of the verse in Romans. I think it's in Romans 8 where it says, if God be for us, who can be against us? And David certainly felt this. But now you'll notice as we jump into chapter 20, David flees. Now, I'm not sure why he felt the need to leave. This was a safe place. It was almost like this was his bunker, you know. He's safe. He's protected. The Spirit of God is in this place, but David feels the need to go. And he connects with his buddy Jonathan, chapter 20 and verse 1. And he says, what have I done? What's my crime? How have I wronged your father that he's trying to kill me? Now, this is interesting, because Jonathan says, never. You're not going to die. Now, how could Jonathan say that? Remember, Jonathan is a man of faith. He knows what Samuel has said. Samuel has said, you're going to be the king. You ever watch a TV show and you watch some old episodes and things are getting kind of scary for the main character? But you say to yourself, it's okay. I've seen the recent episodes and they're still alive. Well, this was kind of the same thing with Jonathan, but Jonathan was doing this by faith because he knew that everything Samuel said always came true. And he had this utmost faith. And so he says, no, you're not going to die. My father does nothing great or small without letting me know. Why would he hide this from me? It isn't so. Now, it does seem at this point that Jonathan is in the dark. Dad has kind of separated himself from Jonathan at this point. Even though they've had those morning walks, you know, where they talked and all, now he hasn't been telling him everything. Even though Jonathan feels like Dad still tells him everything, no, it can't be. It can't be so. Sometimes we have misdirected or misguided faith in people. I remember one time when somebody tried to warn me about someone that I was working with in a church. One of my faithful board members had come up to me and cautioned me about this individual. And I was kind of like Jonathan here. I was like, no. I have the utmost faith in this person's loyalty and their faithfulness. He was right. Just like David was right. David was right. Saul was out to kill him. So David takes an oath and says, listen, your dad knows that you and I have connected. And he has said, Jonathan must not know this or he'll be grieved. Listen, Jonathan, as surely as the Lord lives and as you live, I'm just a step away from death. Now, what does that tell you about David? Think about this for a minute. David has been miraculously preserved by the power of God at the school in Naioth at Ramah. God just came on the scene, and David saw this. And now David is on the run. And he has gone to meet Jonathan. And it says, hey, I'm just a step away from death. Is it possible that David's faith is wavering just a little bit? Maybe. At this point, yeah, I think when he was in that meeting with, and everybody's prophesying, the Spirit of God is so real, I think David was absolutely certain then. But you know, sometimes we have to go back to our jobs. We have to go, like with Jesus, who's been on the Mount of Transfiguration, but he and the disciples that were with him have to come down into the valley and have to encounter the demon-possessed child. You can't always live on a mountaintop experience. The purpose of mountaintop experiences are for you to make commitments that you will carry out when you're in your day-to-day walk. Does that make sense? God doesn't, he doesn't ever intend for us to live up on the mountaintop. When you think about the mountaintop, there's thin air there. It might be a wonderful place, you get some beautiful views, but it's not a place to live. David's now down in the valley, and he has a little bit of a question. I'm just a step away from death here, Jonathan. And Jonathan says, listen, whatever you want, I'll do it for you. So David devises this plan. Well, tomorrow's the new moon feast. I'm supposed to dine with the king. So even though David's been on the run, Saul's tried to kill him, there's still supposed to be, Saul's expecting some measure of normalcy. He said, I'm supposed to dine with the king. I'm going to go and hide in the field until the evening of the day after tomorrow. If your dad misses me at all, just tell him that I asked permission to hurry to Bethlehem because of an annual sacrifice. If he says, oh, okay, then I'm safe. But if he loses his temper, you can be sure he's determined to harm me. And so Jonathan says, and then David says, listen, if I'm guilty, then kill me yourself. And Jonathan's like, no way, I'm not going to do that. If I had the least inkling that Dad was going to hurt you, wouldn't I let you know? Okay, so they devise this plan. And it has to do with this little boy, because David's got, if it's dangerous, David wants to be able to split the scene and live. And so he hides by this rock, and he says, we're going to have this little boy shoot the arrow. I'll shoot the arrows, and I'll tell the boy one thing if it's safe and one thing if it's not safe. So anyway, Jonathan goes to this dinner. And the first day, Saul notices that David's seat is empty. We're about to end.